Not much changes on the stroke of 11 in any practical sense, but Britain can no longer go into council meetings at ministerial level, prime ministerial level in the EU. The seats in the European Parliament have been withdrawn from us at that moment. On Monday, something interesting starts happening in terms of defining the future relationship. The Prime Minister here is going to give a speech, and the EU is going to unveil some of its plans for how it sees those negotiations. The Prime Minister, I understand, very much sees the future relationship with the EU as the sort of trade relationship that Canada has. And that is pretty at the distant end of the scale in terms of expectations and where they were not so many months ago when Theresa May was in number 10. He thinks, therefore, if he's going for that kind of deal, the only restrictions the EU can put on Britain are pretty light ones, the sort of ones that they put on Canada. The EU, I expect, is going to come back and say, who are you kidding? Things are going to be pretty subdued here tonight with a light show, which doesn't look as though it's going to be that extravagant, and some drinks inside here. This is how the day was marked around London.
The two sides were back for one last time.
I've already seen some people dressed in very garish Union Jacks that make me feel quite shivery.
So good! So good! So good! I've been inclined.
Battle is done, but the divisions remain.
We are going to be Great Britain, and you are going to be the little European.
Have you split the country in two over Brexit, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister, if you could lean in a little bit, that would be lovely.
A symbolic cabinet meeting in Sunderland, where Leave triumphed and where Brexit swung Labour votes to the Tories last month.
You need a block and tackle to get me out.
On Monday, in a speech, the Prime Minister will say he wants a trade deal like Canada has with the EU, openly acknowledging for the first time that approach means expensive delays as products are checked at the border to the EU. The government's estimates and the consensus amongst economists is that will hurt areas like the North East.
I think for many people that voted in Brexit, I don't think money even came into their minds.
It used to be the way elections were run. You put up a programme and people voted depending on how it would make them and their family better off. But this was different.
This was different.
And these voters who backed your cause might even take a hit and be OK with that, if it came to that.
If it came to it, they would. Oh, yes. If it came to it, many of them would.
In Brussels, some of his party's MEPs were milking the moment as they left the European Parliament for the last time. The UK's EU office lowered its EU flag. Its staff numbers now go up with the extra pressures of being outside the EU club. That club today put on a show of chin-up unity.
As the sun rises tomorrow, a new chapter for our union of 27 will start.
Why haven't other EU countries followed us? Truth is, this doesn't look very tempting to them, isn't it?
Well, it did 3 years ago. I mean, 3 years ago, we had Salvini in Italy and others talking about leaving the euro, etc.
And then they watched what happened here.
They watched.
There's been no contagion.
They watched the total and utter holics the British government made of Brexit, and because of that, they've kind of withdrawn a bit from their positions. What I do know,
it's not that they watched what happens, and how the EU negotiates, and how the EU gets the upper hand, and how the EU is a bigger force than an individual country.
The EU is enormously powerful. Hugely powerful. But
that's why there hasn't been contagion, isn't it? That's why people aren't following us out the door.
This is the beginning of the end of the European project.
As I've said to fellow Socialist Party leaders all across Europe, the conditions that led to the no vote in Britain also exist in France, they exist in Germany, they exist in the Czech Republic, Italy and Spain. Don't run away with the idea that the anger in Britain about the way the establishment treated them isn't replicated all across Europe.
It sounds like you've got more sympathy there for the Leave argument.
What I've got is sympathy for the way and why people voted in that referendum. I campaigned all over the country in that referendum.
Not hard enough, some people say.
Well, people said that afterwards. Nobody said that during the campaign. Nobody said that at that time.
Whitehall was lit up this evening. The day of the referendum, civil servants spoke of distress and despair. Back then, nearly 3/4 of all MPs backed Remain.
we're one of the biggest economies in the world, perhaps the 6th biggest economy in the world. We can make a success of the choice that we make, and I'm sure that's exactly what we will do, and I wish the government well in all their endeavours to make sure that happens.
A couple of hundred pro-Remain demonstrators serenaded the EU's office in London. One said, "We'll be back." The EU officials looked touched, not convinced.
Sooner rather than later.
Some people who fought alongside you for leave are trying to reach out to Remainers today and not gloat and not bask in their victory.
Well, that's because they've got a split party. You're talking about the Conservatives. Look, come on, you and I both know.
Doesn't sound like you're up for that.
Half the cabinet.
You won't be doing that reaching out.
I will. Half the cabinet voted Remain.
Give me a rehearsal of it now. Your reaching out message.
Half the cabinet voted Remain. They're embarrassed by what's going on.
I want to hear you in non-gloat mode. Give me your reach out message.
Look, I tell you what. I'll quote the Financial Times. This is now happening. Let's join together and let's make the best of it. And I would say to people who voted Remain, we are living in a functioning democracy. The war is over.
Boris Johnson must now shape a new relationship with Europe, making a reality of that word, Brexit, which convulsed our politics, divided the nation, and as of 4 hours' time, is law.
Well, with me now are Anne Widdecombe from the Brexit Party and Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, Alistair Campbell. Anne Widdecombe, is this the happiest day of your life?
Well, it's certainly one of the happiest. I feel very, very jubilant, but I'm also conscious of a great relief. Because I think, like an awful lot of other people, there have been times over the last 3.5 years when I thought, well, I wonder if this really is going to happen. And today, it's happened, or it's happening.
So, Alistair Campbell, are you sad or angry or what?
I'm very sad. I think that the country has taken a wrong turn. I think we will live to regret it. I think that the promises that were made are not being delivered, and now we're entering the hard part. Now, look, I'm British, I'm a patriot. I really hope that the country does well in the future, but I really fear that we've chosen our own decline, and it makes me sad and, yes, angry as well.
Do you have any anxiety that he may be right?
No, and time, of course, will tell. But we're the world's 5th largest economy. We can open up trade deals with the rest of the world. We take control of our own borders, our own laws. What does worry me is if Boris doesn't actually stick to the red lines that he says he has drawn. Now, we know Boris can talk big. The question is, will he also walk big?
So if
that's
it all
my
goes
only
wrong,
doubt.
it'll be his fault, not yours?
Well, it depends what goes wrong. I'm worried about the next 12 months, the negotiations. Now, if he gives away too much, like if he gives in to von der Leyen's demand for regulatory alignment for a level playing field, then it will be his fault. And I hope he doesn't do that.
But Alistair Campbell, you could also have made a historic mistake all these years, and it could be a roaring success.
Well, you can worry about the future, you can be confident about the future as Anne is, but I think the fact that we're already talking about this depending upon the trustworthiness of Boris Johnson underlines just how far there is to go. He won the election, okay? Fair play, he won the election. The message was get Brexit done. Brexit has not been done. We are leaving the European Union. What that now actually means in practice, I think, does give me cause for concern. And I worry that for all the red, white and blue on Downing Street and the 50p coins, when you read the text of that, it says peace, prosperity and friendship with all nations. I worry that we've undermined all three of those by what we're doing today.
Are you really going to be handing those 50p's back if you get them in the shop?
Oh, well, I'm going to suggest that shops have a little charity box in every single shop that handles cash.
Most of them do anyway.
But they do, exactly, and all my 50p's will go in one of those boxes.
What if...
Can you give one to me in case I don't get
I'll
one?
give one to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you haven't got one yet? No.
I haven't got one
You're
yet.
looking forward to it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I mean, there is a risk here, isn't there? His historic gamble. We're on our own. What does that say about our place in the world?
I don't believe it's a gamble. I believe it's a carefully thought through decision, which is different from a gamble. I think what it says about our place in the world is that we're free and independent and can do deals with the rest of the world. And I'm particularly hopeful for Africa because actually you think of the EU as benign, but it is a great big protectionist bloc. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do deals which will benefit both of us.
The African continent is a long way away.
I think there's very little that we are doing what Anne's just said that we can't do now. And I think that we are turning our back on the European Union. I think you've seen in the rather graceful way that the Europeans have handled our exit, that actually I think people will see that that's where our friendships are. I think relying on Trump is going to be a big mistake, particularly right now. And I think you're already seeing the worries in that relationship. So I think to use a phrase, I think we could have, by staying, we could have had our cake and eaten it, and that's what we were doing.
We had no control over our own affairs. You know, I spent 7 years, Alistair also spent years in government in a different way, but I spent 7 years in government actually seeing on an almost daily basis that we couldn't do anything that wasn't compatible with EU law, that if they gave us a directive that we didn't want, we nevertheless had to implement it. I watched how helpless we were, and that was when my views on the EU really hardened. Until then, I'd been moderately ambivalent.
You've always styled yourself as, you know, something of a radical, shaking things up. Isn't there a little part of you that sort of sniffs the air and thinks, ooh, freedom, revolution?
If I felt that this was genuine freedom, if I thought that this was revolution, but I do worry that it's choosing decline. Now, as I say, if they make it work, fine and great, but I've seen very little coming out of the mouths of our politicians that actually suggests to me they've thought that through. So, listen, I hope it works. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I will be.
Everything I've heard coming from the mouths of politicians, at least the politicians who are going to be responsible for implementing it, encourages me. But my big concern is, will they actually do it? Will they stick to becoming a competitor on the EU's doorstep, or will we just have a level playing field, in which case we might as well not have bothered coming up?
Is this a revolutionary or a reactionary move at the end of the day? I mean, Alistair,
I just believe it's an entirely sensible move.
Is that conservative? A conservative
No,
thing,
it's a sensible move.
It's taking the country back. It's taking the country back to something that we thought we had before, but actually it probably never existed. And as far as when we talk about peace, prosperity and friendship and nations, the European Union helped the UK do that.
Well, I mean, first of all, peace is kept by NATO, not by the EU. Secondly, prosperity, with the world's 5th largest economy, we can be very prosperous indeed and more prosperous. So I do believe that I believe there's a real chance opening up before us, and I think we want to go in there and take it. And not just be afraid. I think you're a bit timid, Alistair. I'm not going to be timid.
Very briefly, will you ever come to terms with this?
Yeah, of course you do. You have to. You know, it's just like when Margaret Thatcher kept winning elections, you had to accept it. So accept it's happening. But what it won't make me do is kind of turn on a sixpence and say that I don't believe today what I believed yesterday.
Will we rejoin?
I don't know. I suspect not in my lifetime.
No, absolutely
but
not.
the next generation are not going to have this. The next generation thinks it's an historic error.
We'll never go through this again. We'll never go through this again.
Well, we're going to be talking to the next generation later in the programme. Alistair Campbell and Anne Widdecombe, thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome back to Berlin and the Brandenburg Gate. Now, here's just a small sample of the German newspapers this morning, and they've all got Brexit on the front page. Goodbye and good luck. It's vorbei, it's all over, says another one, and goodbye so long, says a third. Most of the German newspapers are dealing with this issue, and they all have a similar tone. It is regret rather than good riddance. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, called Brexit a significant blow to us all, but promised her country would want it to stay as Britain's partner and friend. Meanwhile, President Macron of France called Brexit a shock which would send historic alarm signals across Europe.
Je ne veux pas revenir ce soir sur les raisons de ce vote, et ce n'est d'ailleurs pas ma place ou mon rôle. Mais je me souviens combien la campagne de 2016 a été faite de mensonges, d'exagérations, de simplifications, de chèques qu'on a promis et qui n'arriveront jamais. Et il faut là aussi, à chaque instant, nous souvenir de ce à quoi le mensonge peut conduire dans nos démocraties.
A very punchy tone there from President Macron, perhaps setting the tone for future negotiations. Now, although the big issues like trade and immigration will dominate the next few months, in Germany itself, there really has been more sadness than recrimination. Germans have long appreciated Britain's role in the EU, despite some well-documented differences along the way. Berlin is a city of scars, mostly self-inflicted, many left for show and tell, like these bullet holes from the last days of the Second World War. This place is a layer cake of uncomfortable history and the ability to move on. Brexit is a new beginning, and Britain is about to reinvent itself. And let's face it, no city knows more about reinvention than Berlin. Take this hideous piece of architecture, for example. When the Berlin Wall fell 30 years ago, there was jubilation across Europe. The Cold War had ended without a single shot being fired. But oddly enough, the fall of this wall also in some ways paved the way for Brexit, because it allowed Germany to become united. Germany was now a colossus of almost 90 million people inside the European Union. And for many Eurosceptics in Britain, that was simply unacceptable. Brexit-wise, someone has scrawled on the wall. Brexit too has left a small scar, an emotional one, and it's Hans Henning Horstmann's mission to make it heal.
I couldn't believe that the Brits would abandon ship when we were all in rough waters.
But
the European Union.
Yes, but there are a lot of Brits who also voted for Brexit because they just don't like a dominant Germany in Europe. They don't really like the Germans very much.
That's the task of my association, of the German-British society, to build that personal trust.
And do you think that is now more important than it was before, while we were members of the European Union?
Much more now, much more.
But can all that goodwill survive the bruising months of trade talks to come? And can they? Rachel and Temi, both married to Germans, both call this place home.
I moved here because I wanted to exercise my freedom of movement, and when I wasn't expecting to get married, and my husband's German, and now it feels like there's this barrier now to go back to the UK.
What are the main challenges for the two of you, especially being married to Germans?
The right of return is solely within the gift of the UK government, so my plea is, this isn't dependent on a negotiation with the EU. That is in their gift, and they can say, people who are married from this date have the lifelong right to return with their partners because we are British.
A Brexiteer might look at you two and say, you're spoiled. You've had it both ways. You're British, but you've lived in Germany. Get over it. What's your response to that?
We're not, expats seeking, lying on a beach on the Costa del Sol. Like, we live in Berlin, it's February, it's cold. We are just normal people living normal lives.
But normal is about to change in all sorts of ways, known and unknown, for them and us. Well, earlier I spoke to Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who is tipped by many in Germany as Angela Merkel's successor, as Chancellor of this country. I began by asking her if she would miss us or whether she's suspicious about the UK as a competitor outside the European tent.
Es ist mehr das Erste. Wenn wir in der Europäischen Union über Frage der Verfasstheit unseres Marktes sprechen, über das Verhältnis von Sozialpolitik und Wirtschaftspolitik, dann diskutieren wir das in einer Art und Weise, wo uns Großbritannien eigentlich immer sehr nahe war in seinen Positionen. Und wir haben dort uns gegenseitig auch gestützt. Und das werden wir auf jeden Fall vermissen. Wir werden den trockenen Humor vermissen, sicherlich auch das ein oder andere Skurrile, auch oft die Gelassenheit in einer sehr aufgeregten Art und Weise. Aber Großbritannien verlässt die Europäische Union, aber Großbritannien verlässt nicht Europa. Und insofern ist es für uns auch wichtig, dass wir wirklich enge Freunde und Nachbarn bleiben.
Do you trust Britain as a competitor outside the European Union, or do you think that we might become a threat?
Großbritannien ist ein Wettbewerber, ist auch ein Wettbewerber gewesen innerhalb der Europäischen Union, aber eben auch ein Partner. Und es wird interessant sein zu sehen, ob das Versprechen oder die Vorstellung, die die Brexit-Verantwortlichen in Großbritannien in den Raum gestellt haben, dass sie nämlich im Umgang mit den Vereinigten Staaten auf der einen Seite und der Europäischen Union auf der anderen Seite in eine so gute Position kommen, dass sie von beiden Seiten das Beste bekommen. Das ist eine Wette auf die Zukunft. Ich bin mir nicht sicher, ob sie so eintreten wird.
And would you allow this to happen?
Wir brauchen mit Blick auf die dauerhafte gute Partnerschaft und Beziehungen zu Großbritannien eine Grundlage, die deutlich macht, wer die Europäische Union verlässt, verlässt sie.
That's a red line that you're not prepared to cross.
Ja, denn wenn sich so etwas durchsetzt, dann wäre es ja ganz einfach für alle anderen Mitglieder zu sagen, wir gehen auch raus, die Vorteile können wir mitnehmen und die drin bleiben, die müssen halt die Lasten tragen.
Why are you so suspicious that Britain is trying to do just that?
Weil das genau das Versprechen ist, das die Brexiteers der britischen Bevölkerung gegeben haben und womit sie ja für den Brexit geworben haben.
German cars are sold in vast numbers to Britain. So if we were to put up tariffs, against German cars, that would obviously hurt the German economy quite considerably, wouldn't it?
Am Ende sind gerade auch aus Großbritannien eigentlich immer diejenigen auch stark gewesen, die marktwirtschaftliche Lösungen im Auge hatten. Und das ist eher der offene Wettbewerb. Und deswegen setze ich darauf, dass wir zu vernünftigen, und das heißt für beide funktionierende Regelungen, für ein Freihandelsabkommen kommen und nicht für einen Wettbewerb, wer wem die meisten Zölle auf welche Produkte aufhäuft.
I mean, this is strange, isn't it? Because on so many issues, we're much more closely aligned with you in Berlin or Paris or Brussels than we are with Washington when it comes to climate change, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to trade with China.
Es ist zumindest eine Gefahr, dass man zwischen solchen Blöcken zerrieben werden kann, insbesondere wenn es zu harten Diskussionen etwa zwischen der amerikanischen Seite auf der einen Seite kommt und der Europäischen Union. Wir haben ja jetzt mit Blick auf das Thema Huawei eine erste Andeutung dieser Auseinandersetzung. Aber ich sage noch einmal, insbesondere die Brexiteers haben ja in den Raum gestellt, dass gerade diese Position die Vorteile und die Chancen für die Zukunft bietet. Ob es so kommt oder ob es ein zu risikoreicher Weg war oder werden wird, das muss man sehen.
Now, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has declared that Scotland is being taken out of the European Union against the wishes of the overwhelming majority of people there, calling it a moment of profound sadness. But she also seized the chance to warn that her Scottish National Party would now ramp up its campaign for independence. Our Scotland correspondent Kieran Jenkins is in Edinburgh. Kieran.
Matt, there have been EU flags flying high here in Edinburgh tonight and at events across Scotland, and they'll be back here before 11 holding candles, lamenting Scotland's exit from the EU. Now, 1 million or so Scots did vote to leave the EU, but the majority, of course, voted Remain. And so public events here have been dominated today by more mournful, sorrowful gatherings. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, wants to channel this moment to build momentum for an independence referendum. Boris Johnson has other ideas. He would like Brexit to build a new case for the United Kingdom in Scotland. But one thing we can say for sure tonight is that Brexit is happening and that the whole of the UK is leaving.
The European anthem, Scottish style. As the clock ticks towards Brexit, and for some, reality kicks in.
I think the country's lost, not personal loss. It's a loss for the UK, this, isn't it? I mean, this is awful.
They even voted in the Scottish Parliament this week to keep the EU flag flying, finding it hard to let go.
Your overwhelming emotion is what?
I think anger. Anger that we're being dragged out against our will.
Nicola Sturgeon said Brexit means the UK Scotland voted to stay within no longer exists. She hinted for the first time that if Westminster keeps blocking an independence referendum, Scotland could hold its own non-binding vote. But overall, she urged patience again.
My job is to lead us down a credible path that can deliver independence, and that is what I am absolutely determined to do.
How will you be feeling at 11 p.m?
At 11 p.m. I will feel, as I said in my remarks, a great deal of sadness. I will feel a tinge of anger because this is happening to my country completely against our will. You know, Scotland on the Brexit issue has been pretty united.
No shortcuts, said Scotland's First Minister. But a stroll along the Portobello Promenade proves this is tricky politics to get right.
She divided the country before, it's already had a vote, and she wants to divide it again, so why do that?
Do you want her to be talking about independence today?
No, I just want her to go and do her job that she's paid for.
I now feel that actually the government is very much an English government. It's got nothing to do with us and they don't have much control over it.
Would you like Nicola Sturgeon to move quicker?
I would, yeah.
No, I like being part of the UK. I don't want to be Scotland to be itself. No, I like being part of the UK.
I will be a European citizen of the world.
This movement is convinced Scotland will be back in the EU as an independent country. Are you leaving for good, do you think, Scotland?
I hope not. I hope we'll be back in as soon as possible.
A million Scots, though, voted to leave the EU. 2 million voted to stay in the UK. If this is a night for healing divisions, there is some way to go.
Of course, the Irish border issue will remain a major sticking point in the complex negotiations to come. And already there's been tough talk from the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, who's warned the country will take a very firm line in trade talks to protect fishing and farming communities. While the Foreign Affairs Minister, Simon Coveney, insisted that Ireland was Brexit ready and prepared for new realities. We'll hear from him in a moment. But first over to Pádraig O'Brien, who's in Dublin. Pádraig.
Matt, we're told again and again that Brexit is a process, not an event, and very little, as we've heard, will practically change here on the island of Ireland in whatever it is, 3 hours' time. But what it is a historic moment, and a moment to think again about the relationships that these two countries have. I think over the last few months, from Britain's point of view, or from the political establishment in Britain's point of view, they were somewhat taken aback by the robustness of Ireland's negotiating position, how it so strongly aligned itself with its European partners over the negotiation period. And for Ireland's part, it's looking again at its relationship with Britain and reassessing its relationship with Britain. What will tomorrow morning feel like in terms of that relationship? I imagine it'll feel something like a couple who have been married for years and years and years, turning to each other in the bed and blinking into the morning sunshine and wondering just for that split second, who are you again?
Pádraig O'Brien in Berlin, what an image to end on. That's all from Berlin on this historic day. Back to Cathy in Westminster. Cathy.
Thanks, Matt. A short time ago, I spoke to the Irish Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister, Simon Coveney, and I began by asking him to describe his emotions on this momentous day.
Well, I mean, for me and for most people in Ireland, I think this is a sad day, and I think in many ways everybody loses here. I mean, in my view, the UK will be lesser for not having EU membership and the solidarity that comes with that. Certainly the EU will be a weaker union, and Ireland, which has in many ways been caught in the crossfire in the negotiations so far, continues to try to protect our own interests.
So what is the extent of those checks that you envisage? How much friction do you think there will be inevitably?
Well, I mean, I think that's up to the UK. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has decided to set a very, very tight timeline for these negotiations. And if we don't have a trade agreement in place at that point in time, well, then WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, will kick in and could be very damaging to the economies of both Ireland and the UK. So we need to avoid that, but we don't have much time to do it.
And are you still planning then for the possibility of a hard border to be imposed in December, at the end of December?
What we've done is we've spent tens of millions of euros upgrading our port facilities. There's also going to need to be checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Even though it's all the United Kingdom, the withdrawal agreement is very clear on this, that goods coming into Northern Ireland will effectively be goods coming in potentially to the EU, because of course we have a guarantee in that withdrawal agreement that there can be no border checks or no border infrastructure between north and south on the island of Ireland. And that also is going to require infrastructure. It's going to require a committee system to put it in place and a lot of political discussion to turn what is a very complex agreement into a practical reality.
When the UK government assured you there would be no checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, were they lying to you?
No, I mean, what's been agreed is that there can be and will be no checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And that is for very good reason, because border infrastructure between North and South in the island of Ireland was a source of enormous political tension on the island of Ireland. But the cost of that solution is that there is going to be a need for limited checks on goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland, because of course those goods could find their way into the single market through Northern Ireland into the Republic. But ultimately that will depend on how the UK approaches this negotiation, because unless we can agree to this level playing field and reassure the EU that the UK isn't trying to derive competitive advantage for its own companies by deregulating effectively, then there isn't going to be a trade deal without tariffs or quotas.
You've set out the scale of trade between Ireland and the UK. One of those areas that is of most concern to you is fishing. Does the UK inevitably have to make concessions on fishing in order to get better access for financial services to the rest of the EU?
I think the straight answer to that question is probably yes. The UK needs to get certain flexibilities from the EU, and the EU will look for certain flexibilities from the UK. And I think fishing will be one of those areas. And I think it's important to be realistic and honest about that challenge early in this negotiation, so that we're honest with our fishing industry, whether that's the UK fishing industry or ours here in Ireland.
Simon Coveney speaking to me earlier. So with the Prime Minister choosing to mark Brexit Day with his cabinet in Sunderland today, the first city to back Brexit when the results of the referendum were announced in 2016, are people in the North East celebrating with him? Our political correspondent Liz Bates has been finding out.
The Brexit bus is coming and everybody's jumping.
A political party, but of a different kind. 3.5 years after the Brexit vote, and Leavers are finally celebrating.
We are out, hey! Get the party started!
It's going to put new heart into the people of this country. Now, when it really comes down to it, it's not about Brexit really, it's about British democracy.
So you think that after today, life in the North East and the rest of the country is going to be better?
We don't know yet.
How long do you think?
Oh, I'll be dead. I'm 74, right? I'll be dead, but I know that my children and their children, they will be British, independent, and it's a new era for them, you know.
So when it gets to 11 o'clock tonight and we're finally...
I'll be drunk.
Outside.
We'll be drunk. We'll be drunk.
Here at the Mechanics Arms in South Shields, this Brexit bash will be going on until 2 in the morning. But although spirits are high, there is still scepticism.
Some of their laws we are still going to have to abide by. Why? If we're finished with them, why should we?
Yeah. So even though it's Brexit Day today, you don't feel like it's the end of the process?
I doubt it.
No.
I doubt it.
They'll still be running about with tin
Listen.
boxes.
Rule Britannia. Britannia ruled the waves. We couldn't rule a pond now.
So even though Brexit's happening today,
Yeah.
you still don't feel hopeful that you're going to get what you want?
No. What are they going to do for me? What are they going to do for me? 84-year-old, come on.
Okay.
Joking it. It's a joke. You've got the House of Parliament, the House of Lords, they cannot even bang the bloody clock. They want to pull a lot down, like they've done to Sunderland.
Sunderland declared first on referendum night, a shock Leave landslide, and being the quickest at counting votes put the city at the centre of a symbolic moment. But do they still feel at the heart of the process?
Brexit's happening today. How do you feel about it?
I don't really care.
I don't think it's anything to celebrate. I mean, like I say, I wanted to stay in. I'm not upset. I'm not going to sit and drink French lager and eat French cheese.
Do you think we'll ever rejoin?
15 years' time, there's going to be an awful lot of people who would have voted to remain, who are still going to be in the same boat, and most of the people that would have voted to leave will have died.
A city that has sometimes felt left in the dark is tonight lighting up its landmarks for Brexit. The council say it's an act of unity to mark an important moment and to bring an end to political divisions. In South Shields, with just a few hours to go until that historic Brexit moment, the night is just getting going. But with the next stage of the process just starting, the question now is, what happens when the party's over?
Well, let's hear briefly now from the Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale, who's holding his own Brexit celebration party. Andrew Rosendale, are you feeling very jubilant there?
We are indeed, yes. We're having a great party here in Romford. People are celebrating. They've waited 47 years for this moment, and I think it's an historical shift for Britain, that it's democracy being upheld, and people are celebrating that we're getting control of our country. We can decide our own destiny once again, and thanks to Boris Johnson for delivering his promise and being true to the British people.
And have you invited any Remainers to your party?
Everyone's welcome. We've got people actually here from Europe that wanted to celebrate with us. Everybody's welcome, because the country has to now go forward together. Leave and Remain, that's gone. Brexit will be over tonight at 11 o'clock. From now onwards, we have to unite as a country and build a Britain that's great and prosperous, trading around the world, making friends again with our neighbours, but making our own decisions, deciding our own destiny, not being told what to do, but making decisions in our own interests. So everyone's welcome tonight, and I can tell you now, we're having a fantastic party, and we're going to be celebrating until the early hours.
Andrew Rosendale, enjoy yourself, and thanks for letting us drop in tonight. Welcome back to Westminster, with just a couple of hours until Britain leaves the EU. And joining me now are two young campaigners from either side of the Brexit divide. Dominique Samuels, who's president of the Orthodox Conservative Group, and Femi Olawole, who founded the Our Future, Our Choice pro-Remain movement. Femi Olawole first, how different do you think Britain will feel at 11 o'clock?
It's ironic that one of the main reasons why people voted for Brexit was to have more control over the country, sovereignty. And after 11 o'clock, we will still be bound by the rules of the EU under this agreement, but we'll no longer have a say, which means we'll actually be objectively less sovereign, have less control over the country, which is ironic, really.
Well, Dominique Samuels, do you feel different already? Does Britain feel different?
I think that we certainly do feel different, just because of how hard the last 3 years have been. We've, changed prime ministers, we've had 2 elections, and the country has had to have another say yet again. And we've made it emphatically clear what we want to do. We want to leave the European Union. And I just think, quite frankly, arguments like these have been tried and tested, they've been said again and again. Now it's time to just move on and hope for the best for the country during the transitional period.
And after you've finished here, you're going to be moving on up to Parliament Square for Nigel Farage's Brexit party. We can see the pictures now, I think. But are you going to be celebrating late into the night?
Definitely. I think back to the Brexit march and how angry everyone was and how upset they were. They felt like they were being betrayed by Parliament. And now when you think about it, well, Boris Johnson has helped democracy prevail, so why wouldn't we celebrate? I know that a few people have been saying that we shouldn't be gloating too much, that we shouldn't seem too joyous, but at the end of the day, it's been hard for us, and we've been tested again and again to show that we want to leave the European Union, and it's finally happening.
I mean, you're putting a brave face on it, but how are you going to come to terms with this?
Well, just the point that this helped democracy prevail. This was a failure of democracy. Simple question. Do all the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit support Boris Johnson's deal? No. 250,000 unionists who voted for Brexit in 2016 obviously oppose this deal because it splits the union. As Boris Johnson swore no Prime Minister would ever do, yet that's what he's doing now. The only chance we've had to have a say on this deal was the general election, in which 52
And Labour
points,
had the worst results since
in
1935.
which 53% voted for parties that were committed to a second referendum on a different deal.
And
so
the
they
Conservatives
rejected
won a
this
landslide majority.
because our voting system is broken.
Constituencies that never voted Conservative ever before, particularly in the North and the Midlands, voted Conservative for the first time in their life. And why? Because they no longer felt that Labour represented them. They wanted them to talk about immigration, they wanted them to talk about the issues that mattered to them, and they quite frankly didn't. You can vote for the Green Party, you can vote for all these other parties for a multitude of reasons,
can't get away from this.
not just Brexit. But
You
the
can't get away
slogan,
from this.
get Brexit
Dominic,
done, that was successful, clearly won. There was a
You
clear
can't get
winner.
away from this question. Based on the results of the 2019 election, did the majority of people vote to approve Boris Johnson's deal? Yes or no?
The way that our electoral system
which
works
is broken. Answer the
means
question.
that there can only be one winner.
Which is broken.
And
Answer the
Labour
question.
got the worst results since
Please answer the
1935.
question.
It's not a question. It's you trying to make a wider point. That's
How
not
are you
relevant.
going to bridge these divides? How are you going to reach out to your Remainer friends? I assume you have Remainer friends.
Oh yeah, definitely. One of my best friends is obviously a Remainer. I think that the best thing that we can do is accept that this has happened, and it's happening. And we're leaving the European Union, and it's not helped by people like Femi who compare conservative organisations to ISIS.
Well,
so
let's leave that there for a minute. But Femi, how do you accept it, or do you try and rejoin now?
Right now, it's about basically watching what happens. We've spent the past 4 years basically fighting over the steering wheel. Right now, Boris Johnson has full control, so now we're all sat in the back seat waiting to see if the destination's any good. At the end of this year, Boris Johnson will either have full regulatory alignment with the EU, have an extension, or a no deal that turns us into the only economy in the world that has no trade deals with anyone within 2,000 miles. Those are our options at the end of this year. After that, we will know, was Brexit a good idea or a bad idea? So right now, everybody can just watch.
Very briefly.
For me, I'm very optimistic by how the future negotiations will go. I think that it's in the EU's interest and our best interest to negotiate a trade deal, and I think it will happen, just like Brexit has happened.
Dominique Samuels, Femi Olawole, thank you both very much for joining us on this historic night. That's the news tonight. Before we go, we'll leave you with some of the key moments of Britain's relationship with Europe from when we joined the EEC in 1973 until the very last moment tonight.
An end to divisions which have stricken Europe for centuries.
Put on your makeup, apply it with care.
So there we are, we're in Europe to stay.
Blackwood Town to Brighton Pier. Turn the lights out, we know there's no one here. Goodbye, good night. The candle is burning, so the modern
With the European superstate exercising a new dominance from Brussels.
I do not intend to let Britain be sidelined in Europe.
No, no, no.
We will neither be Fortress Britain, nor will we be an open house.
We did not get that fair sharing, but we live to fight another day.
Like me or loathe me, don't bind my hands.
This is the year 2005, not 1945.
There is no disunity whatsoever in the Conservative Party.
But that rebellion is not dead.
The legislation is gone, John. It's finished.
Why doesn't he admit the reason he won't have a referendum is that he's scared of losing it?
If we were deciding to join the euro, we would have a referendum.
We will give the British people a referendum. The choice is in your hands.
I will be advocating vote leave.
Turn the lights out before you leave. Good night. Goodbye.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
I love this country and I feel honoured
to serve the country I love.
Get Brexit done by January the 31st.